Hey there, fellow plant enthusiast. Ever feel like your love for gardening and your furry best friend are at odds?
It's a question we get all the time.
Right. But what if I told you we can have it all? A garden that's both gorgeous and safe for our canine companions.
Absolutely. We're diving deep into dog-friendly gardening today.
Get ready for some practical tips, surprising plant facts, and maybe even a few additions to your shopping list.
Sounds like fun. Where should we start?
Safety first, right? It seems like every source, from the BBC Gardener's World magazine to the ASPCA, stresses how important it is to ID and remove toxic plants, like those sneaky threats hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, you really have to be careful. What's wild is how many seemingly harmless plants can actually send your dog to the vet.
You're telling me, give me some examples. What should I be on the lookout for?
Lilies are a big one. They're beautiful, yes, but even a small nibble can cause acute kidney failure in dogs.
Oh, wow. I had no idea lilies were so dangerous.
They are. And then there's foxgloves. Those elegant bell-shaped flowers. Yeah, those contain toxins that can affect a dog's heart.
See, this is why I need an expert. I would never have guessed that. What about more common plants? Anything in my average backyard that could be a problem?
You bet. The ASPCA list mentions hostas. Those are everywhere.
No way. I have tons of those. Ugh. Okay, this is a little scary.
Don't panic. We just want you to be informed. The key takeaway here is to do your research before you plant. Don't just assume something is safe because it's popular. Oh, and don't forget about things like cocoa mulch.
Cocoa mulch? You mean that stuff that smells like chocolate? I love that stuff.
I know, right? But dogs are highly sensitive to the theobromine in chocolate. What smells delicious to us can actually be toxic to them.
Okay. I never thought about it like that.
It's like that old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But in this case, it's more like, one man's fragrant mulch is another dog's emergency vet visit.
That's a good way to put it. So beyond plants themselves, what other garden hazards should we be aware of? I know I read something about slug pellets.
Oh yeah, good catch. Even organic slug pellets can be a problem. They often contain iron phosphate, which can be toxic to dogs in large amounts.
Really? I always thought those were supposed to be the safe option.
They are, generally, but it's all about the dosage. Just like with anything else, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right?
Right.
And then there are always your usual suspects in the garden shed. Fertilizers, insecticides, herbicides, all that stuff. Make sure those are stored safely out of reach.
Yeah, for sure. My dog would get into anything if I let him.
And don't forget about your compost bin.
Oh, right. Because who can resist rotting food scraps?
Exactly. We might think it's gross, but to a dog, that's like a gourmet buffet. Plus, there's always the risk of mold, which can be really harmful to them.
That's a good point. I'm definitely going to have to do a safety check in my backyard after this.
It's always a good idea. You know, it's funny because we often focus on what we can see in the garden, those obvious threats.
Right.
But we have to remember that dogs experience the world through their noses.
It's true. I always joke that my dog's nose is basically a superpower.
Well, it kind of is. And what seems harmless to us, like a bag of fertilizer or a discarded chicken bone, to a dog, that's an irresistible olfactory magnet.
Totally. I've lost count of how many times I've had to wrestle something smelly out of my dog's mouth.
Right. So removing those temptations is key. But, you know, instead of just focusing on what we should remove from our gardens to keep our dogs safe, I think it's also interesting to think about designing our gardens in a way that actually works with a dog's natural instincts.
And that's an interesting thought. I love that. Tell me more about that. What do you have in mind?
Well, I read this article in Florissa, and they had this fascinating section on how dogs are natural patrollers. It's in their DNA, you know? They like to have a perimeter. And so the article talked about how if you create clear paths around your garden beds, you're not only protecting your plants from being trampled, but you're also satisfying that instinctual need to patrol.
Okay, that's brilliant. I can totally see that. Like, instead of my dog weaving in and out of my flower beds, he could have his own designated route.
Exactly. It's all about working with their nature instead of against it.
I love that approach. It makes so much sense. And what about barriers? I'm all for a wild, untamed look, but I also had to be realistic about my dog's tendency to explore with his nose and paws.
Yeah, I hear you. Barriers are definitely your best friend in those situations.
What are some dog-friendly options? Like, I don't want to create a fortress in my backyard.
You don't have to. You can use sturdy, dog-friendly plants as natural borders, boxwoods, marberry, things like that. Or get creative with decorative fencing, stone walls, even driftwood. There are so many aesthetically pleasing ways to create boundaries.
I love that. Form and function. It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And what about digging? I feel like that's the eternal struggle for dog owners.
Oh, tell me about it. My dog thinks every freshly turned patch of soil is his personal invitation to excavate.
Right. It's like they can sniff out a new planting hole from a mile away.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Instead of trying to eliminate the digging instinct altogether, which, let's face it, is nearly impossible, why not give them an outlet they're allowed to enjoy?
Okay, I like where you're going with this. How do we do that?
Redirection is key. You can easily create a designated digging zone using a sandbox, a raised bed filled with loose soil, or even just a specific corner of your yard.
I love that. It's like giving them their own little construction site where they can dig to their heart's content.
Exactly. And to make it extra enticing, bury a few toys or treats in there.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm sure my dog would go nuts for that.
I bet. Speaking of going nuts, we've talked a lot about hazards and boundaries, but what about adding some dog-friendly plants into the mix?
Okay, yes. Let's talk about the fun stuff. I'm ready to add some beauty to this dog-friendly garden. What are your top picks?
Well, you can never go wrong with classics like roses and sunflowers.
I love those.
They're hardy, cheerful, and perfectly safe for dogs.
Music to my ears. What else?
Camellias are another great option. They have those gorgeous, lush blooms, but thankfully, they're not toxic to our canine friends.
Okay, those are all gorgeous. I actually have some sunflowers and camellias in my garden already, so at least I'm off to a good start.
That's wonderful. And if you're looking for something a little different, you can even incorporate some edible options.
Edible, you say? Like fruits and veggies my dog can munch on.
Exactly. Strawberries, blueberries, even certain types of herbs. It's like adding a sensory dimension that both you and your dog can enjoy.
Wait, strawberries and blueberries, you're telling me I can grow a snack garden that doubles as dog-friendly landscaping? This is amazing. I love it.
I know, right? And speaking of senses, let's not forget about the power of scent. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and mint, they not only smell divine to us, but also provide intriguing aromas for dogs to explore.
So instead of just thinking about what looks good, I should be thinking about what smells good too, right?
Exactly. You're creating a multi-sensory experience for your furry friend.
It's like I'm designing a whole spa day for my dog. Minus the cucumbers on the eyes, of course.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm loving all of this. But before we get too carried away with flowers and herbs, let's talk about lawns. Because let's be real, those lush green carpets can be a bit of a challenge when you've got a dog.
Oh, I hear you. Those brown spots from dog urine are the bane of my existence.
Yes. Tell me about it. I've tried everything watering the area down, using special lawn treatments, but those brown spots always seem to pop up.
I feel your pain. It's a common problem. But thankfully, there are solutions.
Okay, I'm all ears. Hit me with your best shot. What have you got?
Well, one option is to choose grass types that are more resistant to dog urine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize some types of grass were tougher than others.
They are. Fescues and ryegrasses, for instance, tend to hold up better than Kentucky bluegrass.
Interesting. I have Kentucky bluegrass, so that explains a lot.
It might. It's worth looking into. And then, of course, there are always those dog rocks that people talk about.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those. Do those actually work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some dog owners swear by them, while others haven't noticed much difference. They're marketed as a natural way to alter the nitrogen content in dog urine, making it less harmful to grass.
So it's like a water filter, but for dog pee.
Pretty much. You drop these rocks in your dog's water bowl, and they're supposed to work their magic internally.
That's pretty wild. Honestly, at this point, I'm willing to try anything to save my lawn.
I hear you.
You know, it just occurred to me as we've been talking about all these different strategies for a dog-friendly garden, from choosing the right plants to creating designated digging zones. It seems like, at its core, it's really all about paying attention, isn't it?
Paying attention? What do you mean?
Well, like paying attention to our dogs and how they interact with the environment.
Ah, I see what you're saying, like observing their behavior in the garden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they can't tell us what they like and don't like, at least not with words.
Right. But their behavior speaks volumes.
It does. So really listening to what our dogs are trying to tell us through their actions.
Absolutely. Because they'll show you what they're drawn to, what they avoid. They might even reveal hidden dangers you haven't noticed.
That's a really good point. It's almost like they become our co-designers in a way.
I love that. They totally do. Because ultimately, a truly dog-friendly garden is one that caters to their needs as much as our own, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's not just about safety either. It's about creating a space where our dogs can really thrive. A place where they can sniff explore, dig, and just be dogs.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And the best part is, a dog-friendly garden doesn't have to be boring or, like, aesthetically challenged.
Not at all.
There are so many beautiful and creative ways to make our gardens both functional and fabulous.
Absolutely.
So really, it's a win-win for everyone involved.
I think so.
Now, I can't let this go without touching on something that I found utterly fascinating in one of the articles I was reading. Have you ever heard of the idea of dogs and self-medication?
Oh, yeah. You mean the idea that dogs might instinctively seek out certain plants for their therapeutic benefits?
Exactly. Like if
Yeah.
they have an upset stomach or a sore joint, they might be drawn to a particular plant to help soothe it.
Yeah. It's a fascinating concept. And while there's not a ton of scientific evidence to support it, there's definitely a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that there might be something to it.
Right. And it totally makes sense, doesn't it? Like dogs have been relying on their instincts for centuries.
For sure. So who are we to say they don't have an innate ability to select plants that can benefit their well-being?
Exactly. It's both amazing and a little humbling, don't you think?
Totally. Like, it makes you wonder what else they know that we don't.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about plants that are toxic to dogs, and we've talked about plants that are safe for dogs, but now I'm really curious. What about plants that might actually be good for dogs?
So you want to get into the world of canine herbalism? I love it.
Let's do it. Give me the inside scoop. What do we know?
Well, there are certain plants that have been traditionally used to support dog health. For example, chamomile and lavender are known for their calming properties, so they might be helpful for dogs who are anxious or stressed.
Interesting. Like a little aromatherapy for our furry friends. I love it. What?
Ginger is another good one. It's known to help with nausea and digestion, so it could be beneficial for dogs who are prone to car sickness or tummy troubles.
Okay, that's good to know. My dog gets car sick super easily, so I'm definitely going to have to try that. What about something for aches and pains? My dog is getting a little older, and I know his joints are starting to bother him.
I hear you. That's tough to watch. For something like that, you might look into turmeric. It has natural anti-inflammatory properties.
Oh, yeah. Turmeric. I put that in my smoothies all the time.
Hmm.
But I had no idea it could be good for dogs, too.
It can be. But of course, it's always best to check with your vet before giving your dog any new herbs or supplements, just to be safe.
Oh, for sure. Always good to get the expert opinion. Now, so I don't want to get too off track here, but I'm really intrigued by this whole idea of dogs and self-medication. Do we actually know what plants they're drawn to? Like, what should I be on the lookout for if my dog starts nibbling on something in the garden?
That's the tricky part, right? Because while dogs might have this innate wisdom, they can't exactly tell us what they're feeling or why they're attracted to a particular plant.
Right. It's not like they can just say, "Excuse me, but my joints are feeling a bit stiff today. Could you direct me to the nearest willow tree?"
Exactly. Although that would be amazing.
It would make things so much easier.
Right. But in all seriousness, there's definitely more research needed in this area.
For sure. It's like a whole other language we need to learn, the language of dog-plant communication. That would be a cool superpower.
Right. To be able to talk to dogs' A&D plants, you'd be unstoppable.
I know. Okay, so maybe we haven't cracked the code of dog-plant communication just yet, but we've definitely covered a lot of ground here today.
We have, from sneaky toxic threats to dog-friendly design hacks, and even a little bit of canine herbalism thrown in for good measure.
It's been quite a journey, and I think we've only just scratched the surface. But before we get too carried away, I think it's time to take a little break.
Sounds good to me. I could use a breather.
So we've covered a lot of ground in terms of plants, but what about other materials we can use in our gardens to make them more dog-friendly? Like I'm thinking beyond just plants themselves.
Oh, for sure. Choosing the right materials can make a big difference, both for safety and for durability.
Exactly. I mean, some materials are just more resilient to, shall we say, doggy wear and tear.
Exactly. And others, well, they might not hold up so well.
Speaking of holding up, I came across this really cool DIY project using rubber mulch for a dog-friendly yard. Have you ever heard of that?
Rubber mulch, huh? Yeah, I've heard of it. It's actually becoming quite popular as a dog-friendly alternative to traditional mulch.
Okay, cool. I'm all for alternatives, especially if they're better for my furry friend. So tell me, what's so great about rubber mulch?
Well, for starters, it doesn't attract fleas and ticks like wood mulch can.
Oh, that's a huge bonus. I'm constantly battling those little buggers.
Right, so that's a major win right there.
Okay, what else? There's got to be more to it than just flea prevention.
Oh, there's more, right? It also doesn't absorb urine like wood mulch does.
Really? So no more unsightly yellow spots on the lawn.
You got it. No more worrying about those lingering odors either.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. This sounds almost too good to be true.
And the best part, it's incredibly durable. Doesn't decompose like wood mulch does, so you don't have to replace it nearly as often.
Wow, that's amazing. Less work for me, Andy, better for my dog. I'm sold. But tell me, there have to be some downsides, right?
Well, I guess the only real drawbacks are that it can get a bit hotter than wood mulch in direct sunlight.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
So maybe not the best choice for a super sunny spot.
Probably not. And aesthetically, it might not be everyone's cup of tea.
Right. It's not exactly the most natural look.
Exactly. But hey, if you're going for a more modern, low-maintenance vibe, it could definitely work.
True. It's all about finding what fits your style. Okay, so we've talked about toxic plants, safe plants, even plants that might have medicinal benefits for our furry friends. And now we're talking about alternative materials like rubber mulch. There's a lot to consider.
It is. But it's all part of creating that perfect balance between a beautiful garden and a safe and enriching environment for our dogs.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, our gardens should be a place where both humans and their canine companions can thrive.
Absolutely.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Remember when we were talking about how dogs experience the world so differently than we do?
You mean through their super-powered noses?
Exactly. And how easy it is for us to forget that.
It's true, we do tend to focus on what we see, but their world is primarily about scent.
So how can we, as gardeners, create spaces that cater to that sense of smell?
That is such a great question, and it's something that often gets overlooked.
I think so too. So let's talk about it. What are some things we can do to make our gardens more stimulating for our dog sniffers?
Well, one simple but really effective idea is to create a dedicated sniffing zone.
A sniffing zone. I love that.
Hmm.
Tell me more. How would that work?
It can be as simple or elaborate as you want, but the basic idea is to create a designated area in your yard where your dog is encouraged to sniff and explore to their heart's content.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of things would we put in a sniffing zone?
Think about things that offer a variety of scents and textures. Logs, bushes, different types of mulch. You could even add some dog-friendly plants that are known for their strong aromas, like lavender or rosemary.
Oh, that's such a good idea. I actually have some rosemary growing in my garden already. I never thought about letting my dog sniff around in it.
Try it. I think he'll really enjoy it. And the great thing about a sniffing zone is that it doesn't have to take up a lot of space.
That's good to know. Because let's be real, our gardens aren't always as big as we'd like them to be.
Right, but even a small corner dedicated to sniffing can make a world of difference for your dog.
I love that. It's like creating a little sensory playground just for them.
Exactly. And it's a great way to provide enrichment and stimulation, even if you have a small yard.
I'm so glad we talked about this because it's one of those things that's so simple but so impactful.
I know, right? It's all about shifting our perspective and seeing our gardens through our dog's eyes, or rather, through their noses.
I love that visual. Okay, so we've got our sniffing zones covered. What other tips do you have for creating a garden that truly tantalizes a dog's sense of smell?
Well, another thing you can do is to plant things in layers.
Layers.
Yeah, instead of just having all your plants at one level, try creating different heights and levels of interest.
Oh, I see. So like some tall plants in the back, some medium-sized plants in the middle, and then some low-growing ground covers in the front.
Exactly. And you can even use things like rocks, logs, or raised beds to create even more dimension and texture.
Okay, that makes sense. Because then, as dogs are walking through the garden, they're encountering all these different scents at different levels.
Right. It's like creating a symphony of smells.
Right.
And it keeps things interesting for them.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for their noses.
Exactly. And the more variety you can offer, the more engaged and stimulated they'll be.
And a stimulated dog is a happy dog, right?
Exactly. And a happy dog is less likely to get into trouble in the garden.
That's the goal.
For sure. It's all about finding those win-win solutions.
Now, I know we've been talking a lot about creating a sensory-rich environment for our dogs, which is super important. But what about those times when we need to, set some boundaries?
Boundaries are important, especially in the garden.
They are. Because, let's face it, dogs don't always understand that our prized roses are off limits.
Right. They just see a beautiful flower begging to be sniffed. Or worse, nibbled on.
Exactly. So how do we balance that need for exploration with the need to protect certain areas of our garden?
Well, we already talked about physical barriers, which are great. But sometimes you need a little something extra, and that's where training comes in.
Oh, training. It always comes back to training, doesn't it?
It does. But the good news is you don't need to be a professional dog trainer to teach your dog some basic garden etiquette.
Okay, that's reassuring. So
Yeah.
what are some basic commands that every dog owner should teach their furry gardener?
Well, the classics are always a good place to start. Stay, leave it, and come can be incredibly helpful in the garden.
It's true. I remember when my dog was a puppy, he used to think my flower beds were his own personal salad bar. It took a lot of patience and positive reinforcement, but eventually he learned what was off limits.
That's awesome. You know, it's funny because sometimes we assume that dogs just instinctively know these things. But the reality is they need to be taught. Just like we teach them not to jump on guests or bark at the mailman, we need to teach them how to behave appropriately in the garden.
That's such a good point,
Yeah.
because it's not like they come pre-programmed with garden etiquette.
Right. They rely on us to teach them the rules.
I think sometimes we forget that. We expect them to just know things, but they're learning from us all the time.
Exactly. And the more consistent we are with our training, the better they'll understand what we expect of them.
Okay, so we've talked about physical barriers and we've talked about training. Are there any other strategies we can use to keep our dogs safe and out of trouble in the garden?
Well, one thing that can be really helpful is to provide them with plenty of alternatives.
Alternatives, like what?
Like instead of just telling them no all the time, which let's face it, can be a bit of a downer, why not offer them something else to do that's actually enjoyable?
Okay, I like that approach. It's all about positive reinforcement.
Exactly. So for example, if your dog loves to dig, we talked about creating a designated digging zone.
Right. Give them a place where they can indulge their digging instincts without destroying our flower beds.
Exactly. Or if they love to chew, make sure they have plenty of appropriate chew toys available to them.
And those toys should be way more appealing than a stick or a rock, right?
Exactly. Think durable, flavorful, irresistible.
Right. Out with the old stick, in with the new squeaky toy.
Exactly. And you can even take it a step further and incorporate some of those toys into your garden design.
Oh, that's a fun idea. How so?
Well, you could create a little treasure hunt for your dog by hiding toys or treats around the garden.
Oh, I love that. It's like a game for them.
Exactly. And it keeps them mentally and physically stimulated.
And a tired dog is a well-behaved dog, right?
You know it.
Now, I can't let this go without touching on something that I found utterly fascinating in one of the articles I was reading. The idea of dogs and self-medication.
Oh, yes. It's a captivating concept. It suggests that dogs might instinctively seek out certain plants for their therapeutic benefits.
Yeah, like they're drawn to specific plants to soothe an upset stomach or a sore joint. That's amazing. Do we actually know what plants they're drawn to?
There's a good amount of anecdotal evidence to suggest this is true. For example, some dogs seem to gravitate toward plants like hops or willow, which have calming or pain-relieving properties.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what else they know that we don't.
You know, that reminds me of something I read about how dogs can actually be really helpful in the garden, not just as companions, but as little helpers.
Wait, really? Hold on. You're telling me that my dog, who loves to dig holes and chase squirrels, could actually be an asset in the garden? I'm not sure I buy it.
Hear me out on this one. There are actually certain breeds of dogs that were originally bred for specific gardening tasks.
Oh, interesting. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, take terriers, for instance. They were originally bred to hunt vermin, so they're naturals at keeping rodents and other pesky critters out of the garden.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. I guess if you can have a dog digging around in your garden, it might as well be for a good cause, right?
Exactly. And then there are breeds like collies and sheepdogs, which were originally bred to herd sheep.
Right. They're like furry little shepherds.
Exactly. And while they might not be herding sheep in our backyards, those herding instincts can actually be really helpful in the garden.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
Well, think about it. They're naturally inclined to keep things organized and moving in a certain direction.
Right.
So if you have a dog with those instincts, you can actually train them to help you herd your plants.
Wait, herd plants? I've never heard of that before. How does that work?
It's pretty amazing. You can teach them to gently nudge tall or sprawling plants back into their designated areas, or to even help you round up fallen leaves or dropped fruit.
No way. So they become like little gardening assistants.
Exactly. And the best part is, it's a great way to bond with your dog and give them a job to do that actually utilizes their natural instincts.
Okay, That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I have to admit, you're winning me over on this whole dogs as garden helpers thing.
Right. It's all about tapping into their hidden talents.
I love it. And it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
we've bred dogs for centuries to help us with all sorts of tasks.
Right. From hunting and herding to guarding and rescuing.
So why not gardening, right?
Exactly. It's a natural extension of their amazing abilities.
This is blowing my mind. I never thought I'd be saying this, but I think I need to give my dog a little more credit. He might not be the gardening menace I always thought he was.
I think a lot of dog owners feel that way, but the truth is, our dogs are capable of so much more than we often give them credit for.
It's true. We just need to be open to seeing things from their perspective and understanding their unique needs and abilities.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Because when we do that, we open ourselves up to a whole new level of partnership and enjoyment, both in the garden and in life.
Beautifully said. As we've been talking about all these different strategies for dog-friendly gardening, from plant choices to materials to training, it occurs to me that we haven't really talked about online resources.
You're right. We've been so caught up in the conversation, we haven't given our listeners any tools to continue their learning journey.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, what are some resources you recommend for listeners who want to dig a little deeper? Pun intended.
You know I love a good garden pun.
I know. I couldn't resist. But seriously, what websites, books, organizations should our listeners check out?
Well, the ASPCA website is an absolute goldmine of information.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually just browsing their site while I was prepping for this deep dive.
Their list of toxic and non-toxic plants for dogs is incredibly comprehensive. I always recommend it as a starting point for anyone designing a dog-friendly garden.
It's bookmarked on my computer. So helpful to have that information at your fingertips, especially if, like me, you have a dog who likes to sample the greenery.
Oh, I hear you. My dog's the same way. It's like he thinks he's part goat.
Right. Always nibbling on something he shouldn't.
Exactly. Which is why having those resources, like the ASPCA list, is so crucial. Because even with the best intentions, sometimes those curious noses get the better of our furry friends.
They do. So
Yeah.
the ASPCA, definitely a top recommendation. What else?
You know, there are also some fantastic books out there specifically on dog-friendly gardening.
Books are such a wonderful way to really delve into a topic.
They are. And for those who prefer a more interactive approach, there are tons of online forums and social media groups dedicated to dog-friendly gardening.
Oh, fun. It's always great to connect with other like-minded people, right?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful way to share tips, ask questions, and get inspiration from fellow dog-loving gardeners.
It's like building a little community around this shared passion.
I love that. Well, I think we've covered just about everything under the sun, or at least everything under the garden fence. We've talked about toxic plants, safe plants, even plants that might have medicinal benefits for our furry friends. We've discussed design tips, material choices, and even how our dogs can become our gardening assistants. It's been an incredible journey.
It really has. And I think if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that creating a dog-friendly garden doesn't have to be complicated.
It doesn't. It's
Yeah.
really about approaching it with a sense of fun and adventure and a whole lot of love for our four-legged companions.
Absolutely. Because when we create a space where both humans and dogs can thrive, that's when the magic really happens.
Beautifully said. Well, my fellow plant enthusiasts, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to grab your gardening gloves and get to work, alongside your furry best friend, of course.
Happy gardening, everyone. And remember, a garden shared with a dog is a garden filled with double the joy, double the love, and maybe even a few muddy paw prints along the way. Until next time, happy gardening.